Hey, what's going on, everyone? Rachel, that was a very, I love the way that you introduced me. It was really nice. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I was having breakfast with Larry this morning. I said, I think I must have traveled the furthest distance to get here. He says, no, some folks have actually come from farther away. Where am I? Anybody from Melbourne? Where are my Victorians? Any Victorians here? Western Australia? Where are they? They're sleeping. Hong Kong? Hong Kong? Okay, there's Hong Kong. Yeah, I just flew from well, it seems like yesterday, but it gets all weird because I actually landed before I took off, so it's like a fourth dimension there. I actually took off I started in Western Australia, then I went over to Melbourne, Melbourne, but they say it Melbourne. Which always freaked me out because I'm a Spanish speaker. And Spanish speakers, we pronounce every letter. And when you go, I had a hard time with English here, let alone like in Australia where the letters take on a whole new experience. But anyhow, Melbourne, Australia. And then from there I went to Auckland, New Zealand. And then a 3-hour layover in Auckland, New Zealand. And then all the way across to Los Angeles. Hey, Mr. Shields. And then from Los Angeles, basically I had to get on walk over to the Southwest Terminal, take a flight over to San Jose, then rent a car and drive here. So all in all, it took me 26 hours. So, I mean, now, I will tell you that everywhere I went, either they've shut the hotel down or somehow called the health services on the airline that I just recently flew on, because I was at a hotel in Hong Kong and I was really sick, and right after that they shut the hotel down. And then I was at another airplane and they were trying to find everybody on the airplane not that I was on, but everybody in the airplane that was sick as well, that traveled with this person who was sick. And then on my flight on the way in yesterday, they had to make sure they put us all through a screening room because somebody on the airplane was reported to be sick. So I have had a very interesting trip. So it's interesting. People used to ask me when I first started traveling to Australia, how far really is it to Australia? And, I could always give them the numbers, the data. I could always tell them that it was, depending on where you were coming from, that it was either, 14 or 16 hours. I like to tell people that it was so far. I remember when Dawn and I first went, it was so far we saw the guy sitting in front of us get drunk twice. That tells a story, doesn't it? Normally I don't like to actually start off my presentations because, just with, big stories or big ideas because, frankly, I get always really nervous about presenting. So I always like to show examples when I start off. Presenting is always such an interesting thing. I was telling a lot of teachers over the past 5 weeks in Australia that, you have to have this balance between the whats, the whys, and the hows. Because a lot of times when you go to conferences, and you really need that why message, then you get it. But then sometimes if it's just too much on the what's or for the four examples and you don't have those resources, well, you tune out. Sometimes if it's the click here and point here type of conferences, then that's not the message that you want. So, you tune out. And sometimes, sometimes it's just a, 10,000 foot kind of perspective and you've got to teach a class on Monday and then you tune out. So you always have to have that balance to make sure that someone could go ahead and apply some of this stuff next day. So I'm going to do this quick little demo because I don't have a lot of time. When it comes to multimedia or media, one of the areas that probably we talk the least about is music. And unfortunately, that really takes a hit. I know that I was just a judge for several film festivals when I was down in Australia, and I would say about 80% of the films that I had to look at had some sort of copyright violation with the music. And so, and it's a problem. So, one of the things that I've been trying to kind of help people out is I learned a little tip, and I'm going to share it with you guys. You guys probably already know it, but it's worth the share. First of all, I got this cool little keyboard from Korg. It's kind of cool because, number one, you can pack this. And it's actually USB. And, you can just kind of pretend you know how to play. Okay? But anyhow, what we need is like music for a movie. So what I'm going to do is the secret here is two things. One, as long as you stay on tempo and stay on the black keys, you cannot mess up a song. Okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and just randomly hit some random black keys here. Okay? I know, that sounds impressive, but don't believe me, I'm just doing something simple. Now, I didn't actually hit this one properly, so I'm going to stretch this key out here. Now, this is interesting, because I take a very mathematical approach to music, because I actually look at it this way. Let me see here. These are all my keys. If you happen to have a music teacher at your school that doesn't want you teaching their subject area with your kids or your students, what you can do is, you see this button here, it says score. If you hit that, and then just kind of scrub over here, and then just kind of look at that, and while they're still standing by the door, and then when they walk away, you can go back to the mathematical kind of one here. All right? So then that way they don't think you're messing it up. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and stretch that out, and I'm going to use another instrument. String instruments are actually great because they actually have a great range from really lows. Oh wait, let me get strings. Strings, and where are you? Ahí estás, manito. Okay. Okay, see that? Okay, I know you're. I'm just joking. That's not me, really. All right, so here it goes. One thing that's really cool is that I was always impressed on how John Williams was able to convince Steven Spielberg that just 2 keys was enough for this movie. Remember? That's it, Mr. Spielberg. Well, what happens when the shark gets closer? And it gets so close. Okay? That's what happens. Now, what's interesting is I actually found out that of all the key combinations, these 2 are the most dissonant. And you know what? If you actually wanted to find out what that means, I asked my science teacher, how do I know that that's dissonant? And he says to me, well, you can measure it and you can actually see the waves. And so I was like, okay, great. Can I borrow that tool that measures those waves? And he says, it's called an oscilloscope. I said, can I borrow yours? And he goes, wait, this is a public school. We don't have an oscilloscope. So I said, well, how much are they? So I went over to Fry's Electronics to pick up one, and I didn't realize they're like $2,000. But on your iPhone, you can actually download like a 12-channel one for your iPhone, so you could actually measure what all your different keys are, and you can plot it. And you can see that that's a really ugly-looking wave, but I'm not going to get into that. But anyhow, this is the scariest combination. So this is Jaws, and then this is called a perfect fourth. I learned this from a music person. Isn't that pretty? That's Free Willy. That's Jaws. Come on, hop on. I'll take you there. This is Swim, Pull. Okay? So music can help, your stories, okay? From something that's harmonic to scary, okay? So interesting way of just finding that there are these new medias that are available for us to help communicate a story. So I'm going to go ahead and play the black keys again. Okay, and just going to kind of adjust this here. Oh, by the way, if you guys have no sense of rhythm like I do, actually I have a solution for you as well. Down here where it says enhanced timing, you could actually just adjust that, and you'll see it all start moving around. Hang on, let me show you again. So you can do it on the whole note. Okay, just ask a music teacher what that means. Okay, or just listen to it. That's the cool thing about digital technology. You can take risks. It allows you to take risks. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of adjust it to the nearest quarter note there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go ahead and stretch this. Oh, wait a minute. You don't need to do is just kind of see, this is, where's my video, guys? See, because this is 1024. I can't see my whole screen. So here we go. I'm going to add a bass to this because I can. And actually, it's good composition, but I don't have time to get into that. I'll just direct you guys to a website that will talk about it. There it goes. All right, here we go. Okay. And same thing here. I'm just going to go ahead and stretch this out. So now I've got some of like the beginnings of like a video of me driving into Monterey or on the water. Okay. So doesn't that sound like I know what I'm doing so far? Okay. But let's say, for example, what I need is change this up a little bit because I happened to actually accidentally, while I was waving at Mr. Lawrence, I dropped my camera in the water. So I lost that footage, but I still have my footage from my recent trip to Hong Kong, so I need some music for that. So I'm just going to come up here and pick, let me see here, strings. Let's pick one of those Chinese instruments, and then one of these. So I'm just going to go ahead. Now I've got me in the Victoria Harbor. Okay. And then I see Don. Hi there. Okay. But you know what though? I mean, I want to jazz it up a little bit, and I want to drop a funky beat on there. Okay. So I'm just going to come in here and let's say urban, and add some beats, and let me see here. Okay, taking you guys back to '85. I know. You remember those days. Okay, here we go. So now, for example, you know what you can actually do here now? Like I could actually add some more violins. So let's say, for example, I'm going to go ahead and just add another track. And this is where just some of your basic just copy and paste skills come in. So I'm just going to actually copy and paste this orchestral strings. Now, one thing I learned about music is you could actually go up on the octave. So if I zoom in here, you can see that I did just stay on the black keys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go up an octave here. Okay, so let me zoom back out. And same thing here. Let me pick a nice little Chinese erhu violin. Let's go right there. Actually, no. Let me pick a guitar. Chinese Ruan Moon guitar. So now I've got... Hang on, let me just let me move the funky beat a little back. So now I've got like the beginning. Hi, welcome to my movie on my trip to Victoria Harbor. I will tell this story from the perspective of the early settlers. Oh wait, I'm off key there. Hang on. Time out, take two. So that's there. Hang on, let me see. Hang on. You didn't see that, everyone. Let me just do that again. Okay. So there I am back on Victoria Harbor, and I'm telling you the story of this wonderful experience in Hong Kong. And there I see my friends on that their fishing boat. And then all of a sudden, but I'm going to tell it to you in kind of a hip-hop style. And I'm going to get crazy right now. And then you got your little bit, you've got your, you got some songs there that you guys can use for your music. So there it is. How you guys, is that okay? You know, my mother was a pretty established photographer in Mexico. She was actually, if any photographers are here, she was actually a student of Manuel Alvarez Bravo before he passed away in Mexico City. So, you know, I grew up around photography, around large format, medium format cameras. And so you remember back then you used to have to work at it to get your picture. You had to figure out the distances. You had to focus it by using a little magnifying glass. And, you know, your subject was upside down and backwards. And you had to, I remember for me as a kid, you know, you had to guess how long you let the plates in. And you pull it out and go through the whole, you know, go through the whole chemical routine. I mean, this is before I can get caught that I was in there. And it was really cool because just I remember creating something, and I remember how wonderful it felt to actually create something, and the photography was really important to me. Just recently I asked my mother if she could send me her favorite picture. And it was interesting because I was expecting this like one of her works of art, and she just told me, I mean, I realized never ask a mother for her favorite picture. Because it was a picture of the three of us, and then Austin Powers looking guy is me right there. Another real important part of my past is I'm really proud of my uncles. I have two uncles that were responsible for probably the worst movies ever made out of Mexico. I grew up always on a set watching Mexican wrestlers solve all world problems. From vampires to corrupt politicians to, if any of you watched any, like especially Mexican films in the 80s, there was a lot about drug cartel, and thank you for El Santo, who solved all those problems. But what I liked about that experience is that there was a tremendous amount of trust that's involved in movie making, because the writer doesn't necessarily have to know what the camera person does, and the camera person necessarily doesn't know all the details of the editor. And sometimes in education, when I go into classrooms, sometimes the educators feel they have to know everything. And because they have to know everything, sometimes they just shut down early and don't bother trying to get involved or collaborate with others. You know, in fact, in Hong Kong, I was at a school recently where they had an amazing theater program. They had an amazing writing program. They had an amazing music program, and an amazing technology program. And between them, they had one good film. You know, but they never talked to each other. And I see this a lot. You know, I see this a lot. So I see these really well-edited bad movies, you know, bad stories. So, I mean, this is one of those things that, you know, trying to get folks to collaborate is real important. I remember for me, when I first started to work with Mr. Lucas, I was surprised he doesn't even know how to do email. This is George Lucas. I'm not offending you, sir. I'm just proving a point. So, you know, one of the things that I started to kind of think about is just the value of everything that's involved in what that story is. And so, to me, you know, as an educator, you know, I'm fascinated with everything what story does, as opposed to what really happens in school. Because what story does, and going back to what Kathy's message, I guess, yesterday, which she was talking about, is giving stuff a purpose, as opposed to just making the stuff the purpose. And so, what's really important here is that when it comes to movie making, there are so many components that I just was writing down on the airplane that's available to us and what it actually does. It helps connect a lot of things that in schools a lot of times are taught independently. And to me, that's something that, you know, I find also very interesting. Another thing, too, in schools is that, you know, now after spending about 5 weeks in Australia, you know, it was amazing how we still put a lot of emphasis on text and numbers. Considering that, I always think that the goal for the written word is to be visual. And now more than ever do we have that available to us. I used to do this little experiment where I would ask educators, especially higher ed educators, to write down like 3 major events that have had a major impact in their life. And usually they write it down on a little piece of paper or they'll email it to me, and then if they can provide me a context of the story. And it was always amazing on how many of them actually involve one of these images up here. And you know what's interesting, too, is that whenever I've asked educators this, they always write down something they experienced, saw, or heard. I've never actually had someone write down something that they read. Now, it's just an observation. I'm just trying to prove about that there are other ways, because when I'm asked, what is the role of the image and sound, the image, the moving image and sound in academics? And, you know, they themselves have answered that it's actually very important. So just a question of, I mean, are we really using it to our advantage? Several years ago, Newsweek magazine did a story on who basically is the most influential person when it comes to economic decisions at home. And probably this is one of the reasons why I think we're in the situation we're in, maybe. But nonetheless, I asked a bunch of students if they can just write down things that what is available for them to either receive information, produce information, and broadcast information. Receive, create, produce, and broadcast. And these are some of the ideas and some of the things that they wrote down. Now, to make this interesting, I wanted to take a look at just a comparison and ask the students, as students, who are the most influential people in their life. And so one of the things that this group that I asked, they said that principals or assistant principals or deputy principals. So what we did is we took a look at, for example, in Los Angeles Unified, what is the average age of a principal? What is the average age of principal, not even in Los Angeles, but in other cities? And the answer was between 48 and 50. And back, you laugh, I can get a drink of water, thank you. And if we take a look at what was available back when schooling was a big part of their experience. What was available for them to receive, to create, to produce, receive, produce, and broadcast information. And in reality, obviously, the only thing that we really had control of is pen and paper. So we based the whole system of assessment based around that. I mean, do you remember when we had slates on the desk? Not that you would remember, but when there were slates on the desk, I mean, what would you assess back then? Like, today is the letter W. And you walked around the class to make sure everybody wrote the letter W correctly. And then all of a sudden with the blackboard, we can broadcast learning, and we could write longer sentences and longer arithmetic. So we based assessment around that. The reason I'm sharing this with you is, with what we have available today, are we possibly missing the boat that our kids can't provide us with knowledge in a variety of different ways? Are we still limiting it to pencil and paper? To pen and paper. You know, I remember for me, you know, as a language learner, you know, there were three things that I became very aware of. A lot of times I knew the content. And a lot of times I knew the content within a context. The problem is the delivery I struggled with. And because I struggled with the delivery, what was the assumption? That I didn't know the content, and I didn't know the content in context. So, you know, I like the fact that we have a variety of ways that are available for right now, but are we really taking advantage of? You know, I take a look at, one of the things that I look at right now when I travel and visit schools is, like, for example, their technology plan or their media plan. And number one, I'm always surprised that they actually have one and not an education plan, considering that's kind of like me working with architects and they'll give me the electricity plan, but there's no plan for the physical building. But, so what happens is it's about the stuff. Like this year, this percentage of teachers will be using PowerPoint. Remember those days? This year, we're going to move 20% using this app. Okay? This is why IT people are writing policy in education, because we empowered them. And so, when I go around schools, I just do simple counts. Are students, you know, when I actually look at these plans, are students still recipients of information or producers of information? And that's a huge difference, because I actually wish, maybe later I'll talk to you about this, I want a year where I could actually take a look at the learner, because it's very fascinating, because whenever we actually go back and look some of our material about, you know, what type of learner are you, any Howard Gardner stuff, when the word learner, when you actually go back and look at that, it's still referring to a learner as a recipient of information. I will tell you that I know kids that are, and I know a lot of you who maybe are auditory receivers, but visual producers. Visual learners or visual receivers, but maybe kinesthetic producers. You know, I mean, this is something that I think is something that's really important, because realistically, I mean, going back to what Kathy was talking about yesterday, if we're going to empower the student, then the student has to create, not just receive. And, you know, as I'm always just look at the opportunities that are available. I know that later on we're going to talk about challenge-based learning as a way that how we can actually take the stuff that students are learning to actually not only just give it back to the teacher, but literally give it back to the community to improve the quality of life there. And we'll talk about that as well. And folks, I mean, I don't have to tell you, we're living in a time where we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of stuff available to you. Have you guys downloaded? Where are my iPhone people? Where are my iPhone peeps? Download Congress Plus. Have you guys seen that? You have access to every Congress person. You have them for California as well. They have their offices, their staff, what they're voting on, legislation, how they get their money, campaign reform, their earmarks and the stimulus package, all this stuff. You could actually assign an RSS feed, so whenever they do something you don't want them to do or do something that you want them, it can generate an email letting them know both ways. So we're living in a time where we have access to things that it was very difficult in the past to have access to. Okay? You know, I was doing this the other day actually not the other day, a couple months ago now. I was asking folks that, you know, in the year 4, talk about stuff. In the 4th grade, all kids of all states learn about the Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Okay? Every year 4 student in all 50 states. Then I asked leaders, this was at a principal's conference, what was the Supreme Court vote? Let me tell you, it gets quiet for a long time. Then I asked again, what was the Supreme Court vote? And it was real quiet. Then ask a third time, and then the computers pop out and the iPhone's underneath the... whereas, like, for example, I was with some kids, and I said, guys, I'm going to ask you a question about the Supreme Court. Already the phones are popping out underneath here. Okay? By the way, it was unanimous. The point I'm trying to make, it's so amazing how we get so caught up on stuff. You know, even in Australia, you know, I was working with, that's why I said it was my Australians here, because I was working with the chief of staff of one of the politicians, I'll keep it at that, and he was talking about how I think that all Australians need to have some basic information about stuff. So, okay, I'm not denying that, but I did pull out a $20 Australian dollar. I said, well, who's on your money? Who's on this bill? They didn't know. So, but now, I mean, just what do we mean by all of this stuff? So it's about, so I started to kind of take this a little bit step further, and I started to ask all of the social studies teacher at my school, what makes you an expert? And one by one, they went around the table and started to share what makes them an expert. After they finished saying that, I said, could I have looked up everything you said in Google? I mean, if we're an expert based on a based on a bank of information, how much value do we add? That's just a question. I mean, is it just on that or what we do with the information? I mean, Albert Einstein has a quote that says, don't ask questions you can look up. Boy, is that appropriate. It's not, boy, is that appropriate today. You know, one thing is it's not enough anymore just to know stuff. It's just not enough. I'm not saying that it's either or. I'm just saying that I know that the more and more I have access to information, it's just not that much anymore. I mean, how did you, in the past, if you had any questions, who would you go to in your institution? Now, realistically, do you do the same thing? Do you have access to folks that you can get the information from them? Or even, for example, on where you have the information. I'm sure all of you can, all you iPhone people can share with me stories on how your iPhone kind of helped you out in a situation. Especially during the election. I thought that I mean, I don't know how your political, well, I kind of assume, I think I know where a lot of you are, but I know that when the Barack Obama had the iPhone app, if someone ever wanted to debate you on an issue, he had all his issues available right on his iPhone app. There were these two ladies sitting in front of me at O'Hare Airport, and they were both going back and forth in front of me about Jeremiah Wright, you know, the reverend that was in the controversy. And it was really interesting because he kept going back and forth and back and forth. And he hates white people. No, he doesn't. He keeps going back and forth and back and forth. So I just happened to have a little splitter, you know, those Y splitters for your iPhone. And I had two pairs of headsets. And I said, ladies, forgive me to intrude, but we're going to be sitting out here for 40 minutes. I actually just downloaded his speech, the full and 22 minutes of it. Why don't you both listen to it, and then you can both discuss it, as opposed to just going back and forth. And so, right afterwards, the one lady by sitting in the aisle says, remind me never to debate somebody with an iPhone again. Just yesterday, my friend says, oh, I'm glad you're not going to be over for the Laker game because you always bring your iPhone. You always make arguments here. Boring now. He'll be at the Laker game going, hey, did you know that Kareem back in 80 did this? No, he didn't. It was in 74. Shut up. Interestingly, you know, one of the things that's kind of cool is that over the last couple of years, I've sort of been asked to kind of take a look at what learning looks like outside of school. And one of the things I found very interesting is that I've been going to a lot of like conferences, obviously outside of school. One of them was an airline conference. One of the things that was being discussed was how do we deliver information on a website. And one of the things that Dan Pink was sitting on the table there, and he was talking about how information has to have context and it needs to be delivered with an emotional impact. And I thought, okay, so I wrote that down in my notes. And I was, shortly after, there was a kid I was in a classroom, and this little kid asked this teacher was talking about parabolas. And the kid says, can you use it in a sentence? I thought that was a really interesting question because I knew what the kid actually was saying is like, can you give me a context of when I would use something like this? And as a math person, actually, I started to think about, I know, Don, you and I have math backgrounds, isn't that funny? As a math person, I started thinking, wow, we really teach the grammar of math, but we don't teach the language of math. Like, what's its function? How do we use it? I mean, that's one of the problems, challenges that we have. So I think we miss the boat when we do stuff like that. And this year, working on this challenge-based learning, I had an opportunity to work with Alton Brown. Any of you know who Alton Brown is? Oh, very good. Very popular. It's amazing, you know, because one of the things that I work with, my specific areas are year 9 to year 12 students. And what's interesting is that if I asked, by the way, I did this in Australia as well. If I asked year 9, if you were in year 9 or year 12, year 9 to year 12 student to describe school in one word, what would that word be? Overwhelming. If that was the one word to describe your institution, how successful do you think you'll be? If that was the one word to describe you as a person, or that everybody just like that simultaneously would say this. I mean, there wasn't even a pause here. I wasn't even finished saying my sentence. You know, I remember one of the teachers was telling me, well, what should our vision be? Well, I think our vision should be a school shouldn't suck. Okay? But you know what, the reason I'm sharing with this is because a lot of teachers want to tell me, well, you know, Marco, you have to understand they are 9th graders, and that's just very normal for 9th graders or year 12 students to feel this way. And I started thinking, okay, I'm going to actually explore that a little bit. So going back to Alton Brown actually does really well with this age group. In fact, any of you work in production, you know that year 9 to year 12 students, or 9th graders to 12th graders, are those impossible years for TV programming, for educational TV programming. And the reason for that is, because if they have this opinion about school, what makes you think that they cannot wait to get home and actually bring some more of that in their homes? Okay? And what's interesting about Alton Brown is that he does really well with this group. And one of the things that he does really well is deliver stuff with context and deliver stuff with an emotional impact. And he literally has just 3 writers that work with him on developing the math behind it, the science behind something, the history behind something, right? And I'm just going to play a couple seconds of this.
If you were to ask a historian, an industrialist, and a physicist to vote on the most influential physical force on planet Earth, I bet they'd all say the same thing. Steam. So how is it steam's the stuff that gets stuff done? Well, it's got to do with water. You see, when water reaches a boil, it starts turning into vapor, steam. And that means increasing in volume 1,600 times. That means that a single ounce of water can grow to fill a 12-gallon container. And if you don't give it the room to grow, well, you get pressure. And if you harness that pressure, you can use it to do work. Like, say, push a 100-ton locomotive. Or make a really great pastry.
Okay. So you guys know who Alton Brown is. You can do research. You can see how he gives you a lot of this basic information. I love this ad here.
Run!
Listen. Inside each egg is a thick albumin, yolk, and chalazi, which are separated by membranes that deteriorate as the egg ages. So the older the egg, the easier it'll separate on impact. Thought you'd want to know.
Watch me, Alton Brown, on Food Network Nighttime. You'll never look at food the same way.
You know, it was when the writers, I was sitting down with the writers and they were actually sharing with me. I said, well, how do you guys go about each show? So they actually, on a piece of paper, drew this little diagram for me on how they introduce something, on how they talk about the need, historical, context, relevance. They also talk about, for example, the more complex the idea is, the more examples they do. It was really funny because they're like, oh, you know, we do what you educators do. Just like, I'm like, yeah, of course we do. We do it all the time. Okay? Purpose, additional support, tips, tricks he does online, resources, new questions. But if you actually know about the show, you know that he relies on the audience to contribute the ideas for the show. So the audience are not just recipients of information, they're actually producers of the show. Another very successful show for this age group, this year 9 to year 12, is this TV show, The Mythbusters. Okay? And one of the things that makes this show really successful is a couple of things. Number one, you're not watching 2 guys teach you. You're watching 2 guys learn. That is a huge difference. Because you, as an audience, you know they don't know the answer. And you're in this journey together. So as if you were to go back to what Kathy was saying yesterday, they are now participants in the show. Another thing that's popular about the show, do you care if they succeed or not? No. Another thing too, if you were 9th graders and I just showed you the end results, would you be happy? because you want to see the process. That is very important. I remember Don, one of the things that Don's son says to him is whenever Don makes a point or something, Don's son goes, "Has that been myth busted?" And I like that because has it gone through a process? And I thought that was very interesting. And again, well, I'll show you a little bit here. Actually, I'll show the next one.
The Mythbusters are going to have a blast.
The most common theory about what's going on in this reaction between the candy and the soda is what's called nucleation. Basically, the idea is that the surface of the candy is covered with microscopic pits and lots of more surface area than you can actually see. And each little pit, each little corner provides what's called a nucleation site, or a place where a carbon dioxide bubble can form and escape.
Look at a Mentos close up, and it's like the surface of the moon. And that might be the candy key. Drop one in cola, and every tiny crater provides a site where a CO2 molecule can...
Now, because of lack of time, I'm just going to move on here. But if I take a look at, for example, that same graph that the writers for Alton Brown gave me, it makes a lot of sense. If I actually went back to what Dan Peek was saying, it's the same exact thing. What I love about this show is I'm thinking to schools, why don't schools collaborate more and do stuff like this? Some do the animation, some do the story, some do the production. I mean, it's so easy to do that now. The learning part is so easy. The thing that's getting in the way is schooling. Think about that. To mention yesterday, it was a good quote that Don shared with me this morning that Kathy said yesterday. Make what's right easier, make what's wrong harder. And in reality, what we're doing is we're complexing the holy shit out of the schooling system, when in reality, when we should be, learning is what's amazingly complex. In fact, let me just kind of give you an example with that. Let me just kind of jump ahead here because you're giving me permission. You seem like a fun group. Okay. Where is my, where's that example? Well, here, I'll just actually jump into it right. I'll come back to that a little bit. Okay, I don't know if, I know Apple's been using this chart. I actually find this very interesting about what companies are looking for. You know, we're looking for people with complex communication skills, complex cognitive skills versus routine cognitive and routine manual. But you can understand and see how schools are trying to perfect this. You keep shining me, that throws me off. Sorry, Don. So one of the things that I look at is that schooling really, I see as it's getting in the way of this part. Because it becomes a part on how we're having a hard time actually trying to assess that. Sorry, see, this is kind of my cool little slideshow of this is what really schooling has turned into. Okay? When in reality, if I asked you how you learn, it mostly looks like this. As opposed to somehow thinking it's this. This is schooling. This is schooling. This is learning. This is learning. Who's done your network? This is where Don and I have things in common. It's freaky. Okay? This is where I'm talking about how schooling and learning. This was a big moment for me. I was flying, I don't know where I was flying in this particular case, but JetBlue. So I was flying to New York. And I was sitting next to a kid who was taking advantage of the Wi-Fi on the airplane. And what was interesting is that he was playing Call of Duty. Have you guys ever seen that game? If you haven't, it's okay. It was the first time I saw it then, too. I asked a young man to explain it to me. It took him like a half hour to do it. Because it involves all this networks and working with people all over the world. And it was a very complicated game. And let me tell you, it didn't take me 20 minutes to explain Frogger. Just a real quick, let me just go on here about one thing, again, Kathy was saying yesterday, because I think as an educator, this is my kind of reflection. Recently, there was a story on NPR, if you guys didn't hear it, that the fans have changed, lost. Because of technology like DVR, TiVo, Hulu, Slingbox, it's changed how people watch, not only watch shows, how they write shows. Because people are more sophisticated now. Because in case you just missed it, you can rewind it. In fact, there's famous 3 words now on TV. It's previously on Lost. And they kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown. But anyhow, what Lost has done is, again, there's been all these technologies that has changed TV considerably. Things like wikis. There are thousands of people that have wikis just on Lost, and they actually have mind maps per every episode in case you missed it, maps of the show in case you missed it as well. There's blogs that are available that actually people can debate. It blows me away in those blogs. If you want to be tripped, by the way, any Lost fans here? Check this out. Ask them to explain the show to you. Sit down, order a glass of wine, because it's going to take them a while. What's weird about these blogs is people are like debating in multiple languages. There's podcasts that are available on this show. Here's a Facebook page that has 850-some thousand members here, and they're all talking about things they liked about shows, things they didn't like, in multiple languages. I'm really surprised how a Spanish person could debate a Dutch person in their native language, just going back and forth. Somebody wrote like a little flash module that actually, if you hover over the people, it actually shows you how they're connected in the context of the show. Here's a timeline in case you missed episodes you guys can actually go to, and you can actually get all the little tips and tricks about the show. Like, did you see how how so-and-so's gun moved from that side of this side of the island in only 2 episodes? Well, the black fairy dust monster was the one responsible for, believe me, I just asked someone from the show.
This is your ABC starter
Somebody
kit.
did this on YouTube. ABC thought it was such a good idea, they hired them to do it for the show, just to explain the show. I'm only going to play a couple seconds.
About Lost.
Oh, this is just awesome.
For starters, Lost is about a group of people who survived the crash of Oceanic Flight 815.
Okay, goes on.
Sawyer is a con man who loves to stir things
Goes
trying
on.
to find each other.
I'll come back to you.
It takes them
science team
11
shuttles the
minutes
survive-
to do an ABCs of this show. You know what I thought was interesting about this? If we started taking a look at the community that's built around this, these people who want to share, collaborate, participate, learn, engage, view other perspectives, and actually understand things in context. I doubt if I looked at any kind of a high school class or not all you college university classes, but are you going to get this type of a learning environment? Do you think that they met on Wednesday for a curriculum council meeting to discuss on how there's to build this type of support system? Let me tell you, going back to our decision makers in education, when they were going to school and TV was, let me tell you how complex learning was back then. He liked her, she liked him, he liked her, and he really liked her too. He really liked her too, and she liked him, and I think he liked him. And in case you missed the show, this is kind of get a breakdown of the show.
Fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure.
So, you know, in schools what we do is we get so caught up in asking some of these dumb basic questions, and that becomes our form of assessment. Now, for you in higher ed, I feel sorry that we in high school are screwing this up for you. Because Lost fans don't give a shit about these types of questions. In that same amount of time, where just TiVo, DVR, and just Hulu, how has that changed the way TV is viewed? Well, simple. It's empowered its viewers to be active participants and producers of the show. It's changed how even TV is produced. So what I've done is I've challenged teachers to take a look at what has happened in our classroom in the last 30 years, from computing, where we had computers, to office productivity software, to just another software, to the World Wide Web, to online sharing commerce, social networks, to moving towards the cloud, and then actually putting all that in a mobile environment. In that span of 30 years, okay, or in that span of 20 years, how much has that changed learning? One of the things is that, let me just, because I'm losing time here and I'm getting let me just move this over here. One of the things that, for me, I just find it very interesting is because schooling is getting in the way of learning. Okay? We're the ones trying to complicate when it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. And I'm actually going to end up with this story right here. This is a former student of mine. His name is David Peña. And he used to hang out in front of my classroom with his guitar. And this is a young man whose father pulled him out of school when he was 11 to play in cantinas in Mexico for money. He used to be in a mariachi band. And we always, again, in music, we always need music for movies that we work on because we're known for a lot of our documentaries and movies. So I asked David if David can come in and kind of record a guitar part. And the next day he came back and he says, Mr. Torres, I could also play the violin. So we told him to come in, and the next day he says, I could also play the trumpet. Told him to come in, and then he says, I could also play the bajo sexto. I'm like, man, how many instruments can you play? And he says, I can play 5. I could also sing. I'm like, David, you're your own mariachi band. So David's actually never used a computer for other than just writing a paper, which unfortunately is still what a lot of schools think that that's what technology is for. It's the coolest thing to run Office and get online for the cheapest amount of money. Right? Boy, that's, I mean, I just watched the whole state of New South Wales make that decision. 350,000 machines that can get online and run Office for the cheapest amount of money. Anyhow, so David, we sat him down, and we had a film festival, and every year we have sort of a theme. And so, in this particular year, the theme was around Star Wars. It does help to be friends with Mr. Lucas so he doesn't sue your ass, too. So I said, David, why don't you, in between the films, why don't you redo the Star Wars songs by yourselves, but, you know, do something kind of cool, like make them in a mariachi tempo. And he had never seen the movies before, so he actually watched the movies and sure enough picked up on the OG songs like a lot of us did, all you Star Wars fans. And he redid all the, I asked him to do just one song, but he did several. So here is one young man. Oh, he's not done.
Cantinero.
Here, you like this one.
Sírvame un tequila. Mariachi, tóquenle la que le gusta a mi vieja. Esa mera, esa mera.
All you Darth Vader fans, can't forget you. You know, just in finishing, you know, folks, this is, as an educator, this is one of those moments that I found really exciting, because if I had just given David those few options of just text, of text and numbers, that was not his vehicle. That was not his medium. That may be how he received information, but let me tell you, that's not how he produced information. And in schools, we blocked that from happening. In fact, David wasn't even allowed to play in our high school orchestra because he didn't play the music our high school orchestra teacher required. And we know crap like this happens in our schools. I loved watching David after that, bringing his other kids, other than mariachi kids, recording them, watching him now take the lead in front of the computer, and actually seeing this as part of his lifestyle. This is something that really empowered this young man. And something very interesting happened. Shortly after that, I got this big old gift thing that was delivered at school, and it was the hand score to Star Wars from John Williams himself. To David, saying that of all the versions, he liked his the most. Now, Don and I were at a meeting at Skywalker Ranch in October, and George Lucas was there, and you know, I thought it would be a good opportunity for David just to play a song for George Lucas at this meeting, and he did. And George Lucas just got up, went around the table, because we were video conferencing, told David to call his office the next day, and to this day, David works for Lucas Television, working on TV shows. And again, folks, there was some quick little context that I was hoping that maybe I can get across over to you guys. But I think that, to me, this is my good example of how David really wanted to learn. David was desperate about learning. And there are ways that we have available to us where we can celebrate that in school, as opposed to doing what unfortunately we've been doing a lot in schools for a long time, is blocking that. You know, I tell teachers all the time at my school, because this is a school in San Fernando, kind of like San Juan Bautista we talked about 99% Latinos. We used to have a white kid like 2 years ago. Her name was Amanda, but she played in a mariachi band, so she became an honorary Mexican. If in my neighborhood, my students would say, if you're white, you're either a cop, teacher, or you're lost, okay? So to have that world expand, to have that opportunity to expand and put our kids on a stage to show the U.S. that as Americans, we have a lot to contribute as well. Sorry, as people are trying to look around me, and I have to really get out of your way there. But anyhow, folks, to me, I'm honored actually to get a chance to present to you guys. You guys are some of the most influential people when it comes to giving media the credibility that it requires. And let me tell you, as someone who's in the front lines trying to advocate so that make sure that you guys get the best that we could possibly get, because I think it's for the best of our country that we provide these options. So, folks, this is the way how we could continue to talk online. And muchas gracias. And that's it. Thank you very much.